to help us celebrate Lee Marshall's amazing life. I want to tell you how I met Lee. It was 1970, Manhattan Beach. We were working on a fair housing initiative, and we both had kids in a babysitting co-op. We would see each other on the streets of Manhattan Beach. I was driving my Citroën de Chevaux, a 2CV, and he was driving his three-wheel Morgan-based car that he had designed. We sort of wave at each other. Fast forward a decade. I'm at a soccer banquet. My 11-year-old son is getting an award. Lee's 11-year-old son is getting an award, and we are both divorced. So we started dating, and as it became more and more serious, I had to decide if he was travel worthy. I have some vagabond blood, and so we went to Machu Picchu. And there, after suffering altitude sickness, extreme altitude sickness, in a tiny Peruvian room, I decided that he might be a keeper. So we went back home. He moved in with his 11-year-old son, Dennis, and we went on with our lives. He was building automated welding systems for the sports car industry. Since he had been a race car driver, it was just a natural thing. He was the kind of guy who, before that time, if you had a machine you wanted him to make, a machine that did this, he would design it. It was before computers and machines got together. It was the early 80s. So his older son, Doug, had a very serious congenital disease called Marfan syndrome. And he had to have an operation at Children's Hospital in LA. When he was finally released, Lee had a $100,000 medical bill and no medical insurance. So he had to sell off everything in that business, and he moved into my garage. It was the last time I've ever had a garage since I met Lee. So he was trying to do small-scale automated systems, and he got an order from Korea. Their sports car people wanted some of those welding systems. So he managed in my garage to build it. And then they had an executive who came over who wanted to see how it worked. And Lee didn't have a shop, he didn't have an office. So he went to a friend, a lawyer friend, asked if he could borrow his office, and took away the nameplate and greeted him there. So eventually he got by with that, and the shipment went off to Korea. In the meantime, we decided we wanted to leave Manhattan Beach, and so we spent the summer traveling from San Diego all the way up to Victoria, BC. And it had to be on the coast, and we were looking for a place to live, and ended up in Bonnie Doon. When we got there, Lee looked for work, I looked for work. He couldn't find a job for 2 years. And so he started developing the land. And I'll let my son Dan tell you more about what that was like. I cobbled together 2 jobs, one at San Jose City College, one at Watsonville Adult School, which was teaching an ESL vocational class in arc welding. So Lee helped me every night, and I managed to stay 1 page ahead of the students. Lee finally found a job in Scotts Valley for Arrow Hoos, which builds roller coasters. And he was an arc welder there. And his next job was in Gilroy for a cable company, and he was an assembly line supervisor. After that, he started building clean rooms for computers. In those days, computers had to be in dedicated rooms that were pollution-free in every way. And he started selling them in the new Silicon Valley with his friend Mario. They were invited by the government of Germany to go there and build some clean rooms in the Saar Valley. Lee then got a job at Slaughterback building. This company was in Seaside, and in Seaside they were doing hot melt glue, and the hot melt glue caused Lee, and he was director, vice president of R&D, research and development. It caused him to have a severe chemical exposure, and it was isocyanides, which the year before in Bhopal, India, had killed 2,000 people. In fact, one of his R&D people ended up dying within a year. The rest of them were badly exposed. Lee's lungs were not too bad, but it affected his brain. He was no longer able to do any math. His math ability was gone, and for an engineer, that's really serious. He also lost his memory. So he was given rehab, and after a number of months in rehab, he was released and told to take classes. So he took a class at Cabrillo College, which by then I was working at, and he took a class with Linda Watson Abbott in small metalsmithing. He designed this bracelet, which is U-joints, that he was very proud of and he used to wear all the time. Well, I'll pass it.
When we first met Lee, as we were just reminiscing with my sister, my mom brought this guy home, shaved head, goatee, and he drove a Ferrari. That was very shocking to us. He turned out to be a pretty good guy. The first thing that I kind of took from Lee was that he kind of opened up that anything was possible if you just kind of imagined it and had the tenacity and will and skill and knowledge to do it. And if you kind of look back, I kind of like replay his life, and if you would follow him in stop motion, you would see just things appearing from the earth, just structures rising and creations seeming to appear out of nowhere, because he was basically a magician. He took raw materials and transformed them into something new that no one had done before, so it was kind of magical. When he moved into our house on 4th Street in Manhattan Beach, we had a kitchen and a dining room, and it was kind of cramped and it was dark. And when you're an 11-year-old kid, your house is kind of like this solid, immutable structure. And one day, Lee took a sledgehammer and removed a wall between that I had lived with that was for 11 years, and suddenly there was a pile of rubble and an open space, and from that he finished it into a beautiful living room and open kind of kitchen. And starting at 11, and then when we moved to Bonnie Doon, he was out of job, we were very poor, so he, with my help and with Dennis's help, his other son, turned a rocky, barren hillside into a lush, deep bed organic garden. He built this beautiful wooden greenhouse, but to get the lumber, we had to go to Scotts Valley, and I learned how to use this tool, which probably no one in their lives will ever even know exists, which is this nail puller. We took apart a wooden building, board by board, nail by nail, reduced a building to lumber, loaded it onto a truck. He brought it to Bonnie Doon, and up arose this amazing greenhouse where we raised chickens and grew our starter plants with this overhang that shielded the sun in the summer but let the winter light in. When I finally went to college, I was able to finally do something that Lee was not able to do, which was help design his first website for Bonnie Doon Engineering. So I was able to give back to him a little bit. And that helped him, I think, expand his business internationally. And so I take a little pride in that. But I just want to say thank you to Lee for being an amazing father, mentor, teacher, and I still have daily conversations with him when I'm thinking about measuring something or designing something. It's always like I'm asking him, explaining to him how I'm building it, and so his voice is always there.
One memory that I remember that stands out was in Bonnie Doon. Grandpa Lee, he had a forklift and we called it Frank. And he would always take me around in Frank all around the property. And one day, my mom, he let me go on the front of the forklift, and he rose me up really high in the air. It was only like 6 feet, but I mean, I was 5, so my mom got pretty mad.
One.
I was 1? Okay, I was 1, sorry. I just want to say that I've learned many things from my grandpa, one of which is the ability to take my creativity and actually do something with it. I hope that Lee has inspired the rest of you like he has inspired me to think outside the box.
One thing, I will echo what Dan said when we first met Lee. He was not like anyone we had ever met as kids. And one thing he didn't mention is he, in addition to the Ferrari, was driving around a 3-wheeled car that he had created. And that was pretty cool and unusual. There's some models of it here. Another thing is that when he was working in our house, I learned how to do stuff with my hands for the very first time, really. I mean, Dan and I were the only people who knew how to do stuff with our hands, basically, in our home, because neither of our parents really did. And so I learned to love to work with wood, and he helped me to redo my bedroom and do wood on the walls and build a bed by hand and all these things. So again, as teenagers, that was a really cool experience. Another thing that I had an amazing experience with Lee, and a very scary one, was he took up beekeeping. And one day when I was visiting from college, I was there and he got the call. The swarm had landed. And so he said, "Come on, let's go get the hive." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about that." And he said, "Oh, I've been," they'd been taking beekeeping classes. And so I went with him, and he had built this wooden beehive. And we went there, and there was a swarm on a tree, on a branch. And he took some smoke and some burlap sack burning and smoked us, put smoke around our bodies so we wouldn't smell so much. And he said, and I said, "Where are our hoods and our covering?" And he said, "Oh, we don't need that." What? Wait a minute. You guys had talked to me about the netting and such to keep you safe. And he said, "Oh, bees are so happy, it's like they're drunk and they're just like out of it. And when they swarm, they've gorged themselves and they're fine. They'll be fine. Just don't kill one. Then they'll get mad. Trust me." And he took the branch and he snapped it, and the whole hive, the whole group of bees, the whole swarm, just like a big blob of liquid, dropped into the hive. And then he said, "Okay, let's go." And I said, you want me to get in there? And he said, sure, it'll be fine. And we went in, we got into the station wagon, and I was like holding onto the handle, ready to jump out at any second. And we're driving down, and we're stopping at stoplights, and people are looking at our car, and all these bees are flying everywhere. And we drove up to Bonnie-Doon, and he took out the hive, and it was all fine. His early years were, he was back and forth between his family. He was homeless for a while. They were moving back and forth. He was put in an orphanage. He thought his mother was dead and then learned that she wasn't. He had very little. And he learned how to make things from scrap, to make toys. And he became best friends with the librarians and learned and loved reading, fell in love with reading. And his dream was to go to college and to become educated. And he started playing tennis. He was very athletic. And he got a tennis scholarship to college. And then there was an accident and he lost his leg. So he didn't get to go to college, but he was one of the most educated people you would ever know because he was self-educated. And he, as my mom described, went from business to business, doing different things and reinventing his life after she described the head injury from the chemical exposure from the leg. He just did many different kinds of things. And to me, his life has been a lesson in resilience.
I taught the jewelry and metals program at Cabrillo for many years, and Lee was one of my students. And I was talking to my students about forming metal with a hydraulic press. And we had a really old press that we had put together. It was just all thread on each corner, and then it had a platen that kind of moved up and down on the all thread and always got caught. And we messed with it for quite a while, and finally got it to work. And Lee looked at me and he said, you know, Linda, I can do better than that. And I said, well, why don't you just do it then? And he did. And that was basically how the press thing got started. So
I first met Lee in the early 1990s. At that time, he was taking jewelry classes at Cabrillo College with Linda Watson. Shortly thereafter, Linda Watson called me and said, you have to meet this guy that's in my class. He's made this really slick hydraulic press and you just have to meet him. So at that time, die forming was fairly unknown. I had been going around the country teaching workshops in it, and I saw a lot of really unsafe and badly made presses. There wasn't any way to buy one off the shelf. Some people tried to use automotive presses, but they just didn't do the job. Lee was caught on quickly to what was needed for jewelers and metalsmiths, and we collaborated for years, tossing prototypes and ideas back and forth. It was very wonderful to be able to work with Lee in that way. At the same time, he was building Bonnie-Doon into a business, a successful business and a brand. Lee was very genial and friendly, as you all know, and made a lot of friends in the metalsmithing community. He was well loved. As a result of his efforts, most metalsmithing and jewelry departments around the country now have a press, and they teach die forming in their curriculums. We'll all miss Lee, but know that all the presses he's designed and made and sold, and all of the tools that he's designed that people use on their desks and in their lives every day will keep his memory alive.
I met Lee at an auction. You know, we were buying crap, equipment, iron, crap, and Lee bought this big pile of crap, and he had a little truck. And I bought a smaller pile of crap, and I had some capacity, and we talked, and this was in San Jose, so we both loaded all of this junk onto our 2 trucks, and we caravaned from San Jose, and we're probably lucky we even made it across Highway 17. But, so, I got myself in a little trouble around 2000, and I needed a job. So Lee hired me, and we had a big following. Bonnie Doon was a great company, and Lee was, like Susan said, he had a great ability to see a problem and figure a better way. And he continued to design new and better tools for the industry. And I really miss Lee. He was a great guy to be around, and we shared a lot. And I guess that's what I know.
I think the first day I went in there, and I turned around and I see Lee getting in his little white truck and taking off about 9 o'clock. I'm going, okay. And he did that for the next couple of days, and I thought, I said, hey Lee, you gotta let me know when you take off, so I know, is there anything I need to do while you're gone, or this type of thing. He goes, I go out on my mail run and whatever, get my coffee.
I met Lee through Margie, and to be honest, the first time I met him, he was very quiet. He didn't say much. So I didn't want to cause a lot of noise in his house. I was a little nervous, but when I could not have been more wrong about his personality than my first impression of him. When he was very nice to offer me a job, I came into the workshop. He showed me around. He told me what he needed to be done, and he was a great person. He was not only friendly, he was kind, he was open, and although we didn't talk much, we understood each other. So I would work with him on and off, and I am so grateful because he was always very supportive of my education. I would come in when I was on breaks from college, and he would always give me that push, like, Gabby, you gotta keep going. I know it's hard, but you can do it. Thank you, Margie, for introducing me to him, for sharing him with our family, for really making a difference in our lives, mine and my family's. And I know you probably already know this, but he was the most kind, gentle, loving man older man that I have met. And despite being the youngest and the only woman at the workshop, I always felt very valued, safe, and that my input was highly appreciated. Because when something was wrong with the pieces, or we needed to work fast, or something needed to be done, he would always ask for my input, and I never felt intimidated or unsafe in that environment. Even though I really didn't know the names of most of the pieces, I would just point and say, what about that one? Or I didn't know the name of the tools either. But I want to say that the time I spent with him, I will cherish forever. And now that I have graduated, I really have to thank him for all the support, all the emotional support, all the, come on, Gabby, you can do it, or coming in, when you're on a break. So he really helped me a lot. And, college is hard, just emotionally, financially, and it was different, especially me being the first one in my family to go to college. But just him being very open with me and being supportive, it just meant a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you, Margie, for introducing him to us, for sharing him with us, and we will really miss him. But whenever we think of him, we think of him warmly. Thank you.
I had the honor of knowing Lee and Margie for quite some time. We did some radio together, but Lori's going to talk about that more. I also do some video, and so I had the honor, I was asked to videotape this incredible voyage we took on the harbor in Santa Cruz for Lee's 80th birthday. We went on the boat. For those of you who don't know, we had a really grand old time. There was so much laughter. And then we went to Lee's workshop, and there we had some speeches from people who are not here today. So Margie asked me to extract those people.
There's Tim over here. He does a lot of the fine assembly work. Will standing right next to him.
Look at the camera.
Okay. They work together on putting the sauce together, packaging and shipping and so forth. There's Dan Brady over in the corner. He keeps my tooling and so forth in great shape. He has a spot over in Harvey West. We used to be right next door to each other. Brian, of course, who's here. And he and I argue a lot. Well, yeah. Okay, so that's most of the crew. Most important one, of course, is Janine, who you heard give the commentary on the boat. And thank you for that. Of course, Janine does the accounting, bookkeeping, and all of that important stuff.
That was the beginning of how I met Mr. Marshall. And from then on, I have hassled him, commended him, thanked him, and spent more money on the stuff he makes than any husband I have ever had. And thank you, Lee. No more!
I met Lee because of Jim and love him dearly. And we would get these phone calls. And Lee finally got to the point that he would start the phone call with, Hi Terry, it's Lee. I want to talk to Jim. Or you can hang up right now. Because it would mean that they were going to be discussing some piece of equipment that Lee had found that Jim would want and I would have to pay for. But it has been a very successful endeavor with him, and I've always enjoyed it and enjoyed visiting with him and getting to know him and Margie. So happy birthday.
Lee and I met about 20 years ago, I think it was. All of us, all the jewelers were making their own hydraulic presses. Now all of a sudden there was some guy out there in the mountains of Santa Cruz building a hydraulic press that had all these really great bells and whistles, like the springs that were contained inside, the machine itself for safety, and a full 20 tons and rigid enough so it won't bend, and you name it. And yeah, so that was the history behind my first meeting of Lee. Lee wants to retire. I guess that was 2005 or so. Wanted to retire. Maybe that was his first or second time, his second time. So, I ended up buying the company at that point and moved it out to Taos. Lee developed a great name. People highly respect the name, and it's come a long way since then. So I thank you for your mentoring and continual guidance, and love bouncing ideas off you, and much the same. So here's to another 80.
When I was a little kid, well, I still am to many of you, around 2, I started to drive a forklift and I loved that forklift. One day when I was about 6, when I came, I saw that he was packing up his saws in a pizza box. And I wondered, and I still wonder to this day, why does he use pizza boxes? He could use his own company name on the top, advertise. Maybe he could even sell them to Pizza My Heart. But he just uses plain white pizza boxes. And I always wondered why.
You're never going to find any box as inexpensive as a food item.
That's serious.
Now, if I were to imprint a round depression in here, I could use this as my own built-in table. All right?
I think
when we first met at that SNAG conference in San Francisco, I immediately started redesigning your tools. And I think I've probably been doing that ever since. I'm always coming up to you and saying, well, I've got this jack. I want you to redesign your press so that this jack will fit in the press. That was the first one, and I don't think I've stopped since then of, oh, it's a really good idea, but, you know, have you thought of this?
No, but that's why you're still on the list.
This is the best job I've ever had, and the most fun I've had, the most learned I've ever had in a new job. And it's just a blast in here. Every day I come in, there's something new to learn or something to do. And there hasn't been a day that I don't think we haven't laughed about something. And it's, it's just so much fun. And it's the best job I've ever had. So I'm glad that my friends called and told me that you needed some help in here, and I'm glad that I can still be here.
Well, folks, it wouldn't have happened without. It makes a huge difference. I was sitting there on the boat and thinking to myself, my God, here I am, surrounded by friends. It just doesn't get better than this. A great sail on the bay, great bay, Santa Cruz, 80th birthday. Hell, I could go tomorrow and know damn well it's a great way to go.
We would dance on your grave.
I hope so.
Lee and I had known each other through online stuff since the mid-90s probably. He said he was going to retire and just kind of fiddle around with these little saws for a while, and that would pay for the man cave. And so I said, okay, fine, I'm going to come up here and look for a job, but I'll help you out with the saws for a couple of weeks while I'm job hunting. And it's, what, 8 years later now? And we're still going with the saws, and we look to continue. But Lee and I had a bunch of standing jokes. I mean, what I remember most about him, what I miss most, is the jokes. You know, it was one of our standing jokes. Is every time something would go weird, it was I don't know about you, man, I just signed up for 2 weeks. And, you know, he would do things, you know, like what you just saw. With the leg, you know, I thought nobody had ever gotten a picture of that because I had been looking for pictures of him doing that. Because I knew he had an artificial leg. My wife Catherine didn't, and he got her with it. Part of him, the thing that made him work was part of him was always going to be 6. You know, if you know, you guys know him. Part of him was always a 6-year-old, and part of him. The biggest part of him was always looking for ways to help his friends. I mean, that's the motivation behind Bonnie Doon. That was the motivation behind New Concepts. It wasn't, I can make millions. It was, man, that looks like a hard way to go. I can fix that. And that was what he was doing. And it just took off. You know, the saws, he honestly thought he'd just putter around with those and that would be it. And, you know, it would bring in enough money to keep the lights on in the shop so he could store his tools. And New Concepts is significantly larger than Bonnie Doon ever was. We ship, oh God, we've shipped 5,000 saws in the last 6 months, which is, you know, numbers that Bonnie Doon never even got close to. And we have, I mean, I just sent 2 big crates to South Africa. We have dealers around the world. And a lot of that is Lee's reputation. I mean, I've been involved in industrial design and product design my whole life. I have never met anybody who was better at thinking sideways than he was. Several of us have come together to make a burn for him. Just out of, he was our friend, he helped us, it's our turn.
I am affiliated with KUSP, and those of you who are local know that that was our Central Coast public radio station for many years. And one of the little spots on that station was a little 2-minute program called First Person Singular. It was kind of a local soapbox where people could come and air a political rant or just tell a personal story or tell their philosophy. And with all that Lee Marshall had to do in life, he managed to get down there about 15 or 16 times to present his little spot on the radio. And I think actually all of the producers are here today. C.P. Lanier over there, Marcy Marcus, Matilda Rand was one, Margie Kern-Marshall was the one who found all the talent. She was out there finding people who wanted to talk on the radio. You'd think that'd be easy, but it wasn't. And myself. So Margie said that Lee would just get an idea and he'd sit on the sofa and he'd scribble it out and he was done. You were supposed to, really rehearse this thing and time it and edit it. He just had it. So he'd come down to the studio and in his rich and resonant voice, he would record these pieces. So the next piece is a love letter to Margie, and this was aired on Valentine's Day. So you might want to get your hankies out for this one.
Ideally, the initial flames of lust burn away into the bent coals of a long-sustained love that lasts for a lifetime. Lust is an all-consuming burst of passion that by its very nature cannot last. We have all, hopefully, experienced its heat. At 70 plus, I remember those flames as I share a table now with the love of my life. We are both second time around folks. Looking back on it, I think that the first time was just for practice anyway. My love just gets better by the day and night as we settle into the bright, warm coals of our love. We have learned to accept that we're not the same person times two. We are unique individuals that share common but different interests. When it all settles out, the important thing that we have is each other. As we sit across this table sharing a carafe of wine, and we reminisce about the evening of our first date, when the restaurant started putting the chairs and the tables, and we had been there for 3 hours and hadn't even gotten around to ordering, we reach across the table and join hands to create once again that feeling that has sustained our love through the decades. Occasionally we are asked, how long have you two been together? And I reply, not nearly long enough.
Love is born in fire, it's planted like a seed.
Looking at a collection of books gathered over a lifetime is to look into another person's soul. It is a more perfect representation of a person than anything that you will ever get from peering into their eyes. I was brought into very close contact with this truth as I helped an old friend put his collection into boxes and bags in preparation for taking it to the used bookstore. Life is a series of seasons, and for my friend, he is entering winter's cold final days as I loaded the boxes into the truck bed. I was not loading boxes of books. I was loading the soul of a friend to sell at the local bookstore. It had seemed so easy, but it turned out to be the most difficult task I have ever done. Life is like a bookstore. As we wander the aisles, we stop to flip a few pages, and if we become interested enough, we buy the book. This gathering together of experiences becomes who we are. Our selection of books is the same process, and it shows to our circle of friends and acquaintances what helps to create our persona. To see the collection dispersed like dust in the wind is to witness the destruction of a soul. I'm Kern-Marshall.
To pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear a starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down in the river to pray.
Lee was a great teacher. I didn't understand what the Bonnie Doon Press was, and he was doing a seminar up at the art school at San Francisco. So he invited me to come up, and I saw him introduce the Bonnie Doon Press to the students, and a girl was sitting behind me, and he was pressing some piece of metal with the tooling into something that you could cut into pieces to make bracelets. And the girl behind me all of a sudden goes, oh my God, it just took me 2 weeks to do what he just did in 5 minutes. And so I understood what the value at that point was of Bonnie Doon Press. And as I said, it's all the art schools have them. So I was really impressed. I was only there a few days a week, every once in a while, because it was a smaller business, but Lee and I had a great relationship. We would talk and laugh, and I would keep him on the straight and narrow as much as possible, if that's possible. And when he had seminars also up at his location on Tassett, so there were so many artists and jewelers. Just amazing things were being done. It was so fun to see all the jewelers come in and play around with the equipment and how he was instructing them and all the sharing that was going on. Beautiful jewelry. And all of a sudden I get the call that he needs a bookkeeper again to start up the new concept saw. So I go running over to Fern Street where he's collected his little group of employees, and we get all set up again, and all of a sudden this thing takes off, which was incredible. It was just so much more than he expected. He never expected it to grow so quickly. So we ended up having a number of employees, and then we were growing too large, so we moved over to Swift Street, where we have the larger facility that Brian remains with the business, and we're continuing on. And as he said, this new concept saws has doubled what Bonnie Doon had ever done. So he never thought about growing the business. It just grew. And the last thing Margie wanted to talk me to talk a little bit about our wine group. We had a home winemaking group that started out with my husband and another neighbor, Don.
And Kenneth.
Yeah. And Kenneth. And it grew so quickly, and in about a few years Lee joined in, and that's when they had the press that they made from a can crusher. Doug found a can crusher, and then they had another older hand press, and between the two of them they put this great small grape crusher together for us, or press. And in the end, we actually have it at our house. The group got so large, we had 33 barrels at one time.
It's my job to talk about another group to which Lee belonged, along with Margie. This group was a little bit longer than the wine group, I think, in existence, because it started about 20 years ago. At that time, two of our, what became our group, retired from Cabrillo and had some extra time on their hands, and suggested that it might be fun to get together with others and do something, and specifically look at a movie or two every so often. So my husband Andy and I joined Lee and Margie and Val and Al Utterbach and Joe Cianciarulo and Sue Page. Once a month we got together and looked at movies. Now you can see an awful lot of movies in 20 years. We were quite congenial because we all shared certain aspects, in addition to having all been, one at least of the couples having been at Cabrillo. We all were on second marriages. We all had children and stepchildren, and we all enjoyed each other's company. We shared each other's big life events, the 70th birthdays, the 80th birthdays, the 50th wedding anniversaries, and so on. And we did a check-in. Then we watched the film, and then we critiqued it. Lee was very good at critiquing. I asked one of my fellow group members, and he talked about Lee's curiosity, his clear thinking, his independent judgments, and his decisive likes and dislikes when he talked about movies. He talked about the plays that he and Margie had seen, something that they always enjoyed. He talked about his inventions. This sometimes felt like a booby trap to me because my husband was always so interested. He asked him endless questions, and the rest of us sat there with our eyes slowly glazing over, since we didn't have the technical interests or knowledge that those two usually had. But the other thing that Lee talked about that I remember particularly is the trips, the travel, the things that they had enjoyed together. And the thing that comes to my mind most clearly is the time he talked about their trip to New Zealand, because his description of the glowworm caves there really arose to the level of poetry. He was in awe of their beauty and communicated that to us. Of course, after 20 years, our group began to suffer with what my husband calls TMB, too many birthdays. And we lived at both ends of the county. We still lived in Bonnie Doon, and our friends lived in Aptos. And night driving became too difficult. And last year, we finally decided we needed to lay down this group, which was a loss, I'm sure, to all of us, because the kind of camaraderie we had shared, I haven't found in any other small group I belong to.
About 20 years, Lee came in every morning, well, the 6 days a week that we're open, at 7 or 5 of, and sat at table B5 and had a cup of whole grain cereal. But this is what I know about Lee, what he had for breakfast for 20 years. Cup in a bowl, raisins, nuts, no brown sugar. Thank you. It was a pleasure to, I would typically go open the front doors, and when I returned from opening the front doors, he would be seated at his table, and I would have the privilege of greeting him, and usually get a quick comment on the headline from the newspaper that was on his table, usually a fairly caustic. And sometimes in the course of the next half hour as he ate, he would sort of signal me over to look at another article that had caught his attention and have a quick comment on that. I was certainly aware of his the depth of his persona over the years. I've seen a few articles about him and started to realize that this fellow was pretty remarkable. And Lee took a great interest in the staff. He was always up for chatting with staff, and took a particular interest in one of my son's good friends, a young man named Max, who had gotten interested in woodworking. And after they'd had a few discussions of it, one morning Lee showed up with a present for Max, this amazing saw, of course, and it just really struck everyone to behold it and realize that this is not just a tool. You know, we're not woodworkers except for Max, a young woodworker, and you realize that this is not just a tool, but a piece of art. We miss him. We miss him, for sure, pretty much every day. We still are kind of weird about people sitting at B5 at 7 in the morning. It doesn't seem quite right. So, I'm truly privileged to be here to share with you guys. Thank you.
I'm married to a jeweler, Linda K. Moses, and she's been making jewelry for about 38 years. About 20 years ago, she opened up a jewelry studio at an art school near me in near where we live in Western Massachusetts, and invited Lee for the very first workshop she was going to present with an out of area instructor. The director of the school, who had only seen painting classes going on in this particular space, which was a 1850s schoolhouse with a huge roof on the second floor. Once the workshop was going, he came up and he was in total awe of 8 people at benches with 8 hydraulic presses, working away, making metal objects, you know. But what arrived at my house was a wooden, well, basically a wooden frame. It was essentially a box with almost all of the wood removed, just a base, some vertical posts and a top part, and the entire press exposed. And I called him up. I said, "What's this all about?" He said, "UPS will only allow 150 pounds for a package, and if by trimming off all that wood from that frame, I've got it down to 149 pounds."
My name is Kenneth Cole. I'm the recovering director of the Lost Language Marine Laboratories. And I had the privilege of getting to know Lee and Margie when he was in a wine group with us. And we would lament about the loss of practical skills amongst the workforce. I noticed it in our graduate students. And Lee had a way of saying, "Well, I'm here to tell you," if you may remember. But he was the one who taught me and my son to MIG weld. He was the one who donated his Logan lathe to our laboratory, from which I was inspired that my graduate students needed more hands-on experience. And from that lathe, our graduate students built 12 banjos. Awesome banjos, some of which were auctioned for in support of our laboratories. But I think it may have been at Lee's 75th birthday that Doug and Janine presented him with a set of suspenders and a belt in the engineering style of belt and suspenders, and I've been wearing belts and suspenders ever since. I just really appreciate what Lee's gift has been for me for a very long time. He's a multi-dimensional person. It's not just about building saws, not just about first-person singular. It was about his perspective on life that many of us had the privilege of sharing with him. So, Margie, thanks for that. Thanks to your family for having this today, and very much appreciate. We'll miss him always. I got to say also that I started a fabrication class. I had all my students read his obituary. We're touring the places that he used to haunt, and hopefully with a little bit of Bob's help and a little Brian's help, we're gonna get to some of those other places and have a look around. So he lives on in all of us. Thanks.
I haven't known Lee as well or as long as any of you. I only met him maybe 20 or 25 years ago. And I also am a tinker and a builder of things, and did facilities in machine tool repair for Lee for a very long time. One day, Lee called me and said, "I've got another project. Could you stop when you're in town?" I said, "Well, I'm in town today, a Thursday." I stopped. And I opened our hellos with, "Oh, poor me, my back is killing me, I'm so fatigued, I have way too much work, I don't know how I can stand to do anymore." And then Lee reminded me, gracefully of course, about being an antique one-legged mechanic. And I thought, and then he said, "Oh, take Friday and Saturday off. I'll see you on Monday then, okay? Are we all better now?" And that's what Lee brought to the table every day that I knew him, is that sense of endurance and hope. We can do this. We'll just talk until we figure out what it is we're doing. And for that I say, thank you. Thank you, Lee. I am improved by knowing you.
Thank you all. There are tables that show some of the patents he's had. I forgot to mention that he invented an earthquake sensor. He also invented a pressure sensor for the medical community so that they wouldn't make plaster casts so thick, but all the patents that he applied for back there, and his notebooks, and his musings, and a lot of the artwork, and many of the magazines that had interviews with him.
Lee has the last 3 patents on the coping saw, and the first patent since 1957. There are only 5 patents on the coping saw in the entire 20th and 21st century. Lee has 3 of those patents.
It's a new concept saw
for jewelry and woodworking.
The ugliest prototype that Lee ever made. This is the combination of a bridge construction with girders and triangles as developed by the Egyptians put into a 21st century saw by Lee Marshall. Even people who have tiny parts want to have marvelous control, even more control. And this allows this hand saw to become a bench saw and gives you really beautiful control. Thank you, Lee.